Welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking a microscopic and occasionally gigantic look at a fascinating, completely hidden world that secretly powers our entire planet. We're focusing exclusively on a wildly underappreciated branch of the plant kingdom, algae. They're ancient, they are incredibly diverse, and they are absolute heavyweights when it comes to maintaining life on Earth.
Now, when we think of the lungs of the Earth, we usually picture massive, sprawling rainforests, right? Well, here is a mind-blowing fact directly from our sources. At least 50% of the total carbon dioxide fixation on Earth is carried out by algae through photosynthesis. That means half the oxygen you're breathing right this second comes from these invisible giants. And as you'll see, their utility goes all the way from prehistoric oceans straight into modern space exploration.
Let's go ahead and strip away that whole pond scum myth. Biologically speaking, algae are simple chlorophyll-bearing organisms. They're thalloid, which basically just means their bodies aren't differentiated into true roots, stems, or leaves like the plants you might have out in your garden. They're also autotrophic, meaning they make their own food, and they're largely aquatic. This is the foundational biological definition we need to keep in our back pockets today.
So here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. Meet the algae, 2. How algae reproduce, 3. The 3 algae classes, 4. Algae in daily life, and finally, 5. Algae for the future. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Meet the algae, habitats and forms. Even though we just called them aquatic, algae are surprisingly adaptable. You can find them in freshwater and marine environments, for sure, but also in damp soils, on moist stones, and, get this, even growing right on the fur of the sloth bear. But what's truly spectacular is the sheer variety in their size and shape. They literally range from microscopic single-celled organisms like Chlamydomonas to colonial forms living in spheres like Volvox to string-like filamentous forms such as Spirogyra. And at the absolute extreme end, massive marine forms like kelps, which form these huge underwater plant bodies. Moving on to Section 2, how algae reproduce. Methods of multiplication. So, how do these highly diverse organisms actually multiply? Well, they've evolved 3 incredibly effective methods. First, there's vegetative reproduction through fragmentation. This is remarkable because every single fragment simply develops into a brand new thallus. Second is asexual reproduction, which most commonly happens through the production of motile flagellated spores called zoospores. And finally, sexual reproduction, which occurs through the fusion of 2 gametes. Now, the biological jargon around sexual reproduction can get a little bit dense, so let's just delineate these terms side by side. When the 2 fusing gametes are similar in size, whether they have flagella or not, that's called isogamous reproduction. We see that in Spirogyra. If the gametes are dissimilar in size, it's anisogamous. And finally, oogamous reproduction is very specific. It involves the fusion of one large, non-motile female gamete with a much smaller motile male gamete. You'll see this in algae like Volvox and Fucus. Let's look at Section 3, the 3 algae classes, strict taxonomy. Now, what's really interesting here is how the strict taxonomy of algae breaks down into 3 main classes. Notice how the classification is fundamentally driven by the type of pigment they possess and the unique way they store their food. You have the Chlorophyta, or green algae, driven by chlorophyll A and B, which store starch. Then the Phaeophyta, brown algae, featuring fucoxanthin and storing complex carbohydrates. And the Rhodophyta, red algae, defined by phycoerythrin and storing Floridian starch. Let's just briefly zoom in on each of these. Starting with Chlorophyta, the green algae, they get their classic grass green color from a massive dominance of chlorophyll A and B pigments, which are housed in very definite, localized chloroplasts. But the real quirky detail here, and a great one to remember, is how they store their food. Inside those chloroplasts, they have specialized storage bodies called pyrenoids, and those pyrenoids actually contain protein in addition to starch. Next up, we have Phaeophyta, the brown algae. These are mostly marine dwellers, and they include those giant kelps we mentioned earlier. Structurally, they are a lot more complex. Their vegetative cells have a cellulosic wall that's covered by this gelatinous coating of algin. The plant body itself is usually anchored to the ocean floor by a structure called a holdfast, rising up with a stalk called a stipe, and then it expands into a leaf-like photosynthetic organ called a frond. Finally, Rhodophyta, the red algae. Their striking color comes from the pigment R-phycoerythrin. While they definitely love warmer marine areas near the surface, they have a truly fascinating survival trait. They can actually thrive deep in the ocean depths, where almost zero visible light seeps in, capturing whatever faint wavelengths manage to make it down there. Also, note their reproduction style. Unlike the others, they rely exclusively on non-motile spores and gametes. All right, Section 4, Algae in Daily Life, Food and Industry. 70. That staggering number represents the 70 different species of marine algae that are currently used as a direct food source all around the world today. We actually have a few fun insider mnemonic study hacks from our sources to help you keep all this straight. To remember which algae we eat, like Porphyra, Laminaria, and the super protein-rich spirulina, think of the acronym POLS SMR. And out in the agricultural fields, blue-green algae act as incredibly powerful biofertilizers. Just remember, now fixed nitrogen, to recall nostoc, anabina, and oscillatoria. They literally pull nitrogen right out of the atmosphere to dramatically improve soil fertility for our crops. And this brilliantly illustrates how deeply integrated algae is into our manufacturing and our own homes. Certain marine algae produce massive amounts of hydrocolloids. These are basically water-holding substances. Brown algae gives us algin. Red algae gives us carrageenan, which is the exact emulsifier keeping your chocolate perfectly smooth and your toothpaste the right texture. And agar, obtained from Gelidium and Gracilaria, is heavily used to give commercial jellies and ice creams their structure. So yeah, there's a good chance you ate algae today.
Bringing us to Section 5, Algae for the Future, Modern Solutions. Here's one more memory trick from the notes. CSS for space. We're talking about the specific microalgae Chlorella, Cynodesmus, and Syncococcus. These are absolutely vital to modern space travel. Because they are incredibly rich in protein and are highly efficient at producing oxygen during photosynthesis, they're actively used to keep astronauts nourished and breathing in the completely closed environment of a spacecraft.
Meanwhile, back down on Earth, they are acting as planetary cleaners. You can use the memory trick CCSE, clean sewage, to remember Chlamydomonas, Chlorella, Cynodesmus, and Euglena. These specific microalgae are deployed in waste management to convert raw, toxic human sewage right back into highly useful, safe fertilizers by supporting rapid microbial decomposition. They are quite literally the ultimate recycling engines.
Which brings us to our final thought. From fixing half the carbon dioxide on the planet, to stabilizing that ice cream in your fridge, to literally keeping astronauts alive in the cold void of space, how much of your future actually relies on these simple, thalloid organisms? Hopefully, this explainer has given you a profound new respect for algae, the invisible giants of the plant kingdom. Thanks so much for learning with us today.